Gregor Johann Mendel was born in rural Austria in 1822. He went to secondary school in Trapeau at the recommendation of his schoolmaster. He graduated with honors in 1840, and he pursued a 2-year degree studying physics and math at the University of Olmütz. However, he got depressed, so he took an extra year. After he graduated, his father wanted him to take over the farm, but he became a monk instead, following the Augustinian order at the St. Thomas Monastery in Brno. He got sick of being a monk, so he went back to school for a few years to study science. Mendel returned to the monastery in 1853 as a teacher, which is when he began his experiments. Mendel started it all by taking 2 pea plants with an obvious difference in their physical appearance. One plant was tall, the other short. Pretty basic, right? Nothing too complicated. So he went about breeding these 2 plants together by first removing their reproductive structures and pollinating them by hand. Yeah, it took a little while. After this painstaking process was done, all I had to do was wait for the plants to grow. Which also took a while, but nonetheless he got his results, and found that all the offspring had grown tall, not one short plant in sight. This got him thinking that something must be going on here. So he continued with his breeding. He crossed the 2 tall offspring pea plants, or plants from the F1 generation. After a while of waiting, he found the results, and saw more tall plants. How sad. But, oh wait, what's that? A short plant? How could this be? So the breeding of the F1 generation resulted in the F2 generation having a mixture of both tall and short plants. How fascinating. Mind you, the tall plants still outnumbered the short plants by like 3 to 1, but it was progress. It's a wonder what happened to the short trait when crossed with the tall trait. Alleles. He discovered that each gene held 2 alleles that affected the physical appearance of an organism. Mendel figured out that some alleles were dominant while others recessive. After this wondrous discovery, he decided to experiment with pea plants that expressed 2 traits to see if the allele in one gene would affect the alleles in another. Turns out, alleles only affect one specific gene. So, a gene such as height wouldn't determine something like the coloring of a pea seed. Totally makes sense, right? And so Mendel proceeded to repeat these experiments, and thus came up with 3 principles. Principle of dominance, segregation, and independent assortment. Mendel discovered that some alleles are dominant while others are recessive. A dominant allele will always show its phenotype if it is present. An example of this is the tall allele in his pea plants. If a tall allele was present, the plant would be tall. Mendel's second law is the principle of segregation, which states, allele pairs separate during gamete formation and randomly unite at fertilization. This means that each parent has 2 alleles per gene, but only give 1 to every sperm or egg cell they create. When the 2 cells unite, an offspring is created, which will now possess 2 alleles. This process creates diversity among future generations, allowing for stronger genetics to be passed on. This ensures that a species survives despite some harmful alleles. And finally, the law of independent assortment tells us that the alleles in one gene cannot determine the outcome of traits for the alleles in another gene. So basically, it's just saying that the gene for height would not determine the color of a pea seed. Despite his hard work and biological breakthroughs, his work was not accepted until decades after his death in 1884. Today he is considered the father of modern genetics.